On May 2nd, 1968, a sergeant with no weapon jumped from a helicopter into a firefight that had already killed most of his team. Over the next 6 hours, he would be shot, stabbed, and clubbed, his jaw shattered, his intestines hanging from his stomach, and yet he kept fighting. He carried wounded men to the helicopter. He killed enemy soldiers with his bare hands, and when a medic finally examined him, they put him in a body bag. He wasn't dead. This is the story of Roy Benavidez, the man who took 37 wounds in a single battle and still managed to save 8 lives. Roy Benavidez was born on August 5th, 1935, in a small farming community near Cuero, Texas. His parents were both Yaqui Indians. His father worked as a sharecropper on the unforgiving South Texas soil. His mother died of tuberculosis when Roy was just 5 years old. His father followed 2 years later. By the age of 7, Roy was an orphan. His uncle and aunt took him in. But life didn't get easier. He worked the cotton fields alongside adults before he was old enough for school. And when he did attend school in El Campo, Texas, classmates called him a dumb Mexican. Teachers told him he'd never amount to anything. But Roy had something those teachers never counted on. He had anger, and he had something to prove. In 1952, at just 17 years old, Roy dropped out of high school and joined the Texas National Guard. 3 years later, he enlisted in the regular army. He'd finally found a place where being tough mattered more than being wealthy, where a Mexican kid from the cotton fields could prove himself equal to anyone. Roy excelled. He qualified for airborne training, then ranger training. He was becoming exactly what those teachers said he could never be. By 1965, Roy was a staff sergeant with the 5th Special Forces Group in Vietnam, an advisor to South Vietnamese troops. His job was simple: go on patrols, train local soldiers, and try not to die. On a routine patrol through the jungle, Roy stepped on a landmine. The explosion shattered both his legs, damaged his spine. When doctors at Brooke Army Medical Center examined him, they delivered the news: you'll never walk again. Roy was told to accept medical discharge, go home, learn to live in a wheelchair. His military career was over before it had really begun. But Roy Benavidez wasn't built to accept no. Every night, after the nurses finished their rounds at Brooke Army Medical Center, Roy would drag himself out of bed. He'd drop to the floor and begin crawling from his bed to the wall, then to the next wall, then to the door. Every night for months, he crawled through the dark hospital corridors. His doctors called it pointless. His body called it agony. Roy called it training. He once said, "If I'm going to die, I want to die on my feet." By July 1966, Roy Benavidez walked out of Brooke Army Medical Center on his own 2 feet. He didn't just return to active duty. He volunteered for Special Forces. In 1968, Staff Sergeant Roy Benavidez returned to Vietnam. But this time, he wasn't an advisor. He was assigned to MACV-SOG, Military Assistance Command Vietnam Studies and Observations Group. If you've never heard of MACV-SOG, there's a reason. It was one of the most classified operations of the Vietnam War. These were the soldiers who ran covert missions into Laos and Cambodia, places the United States wasn't officially operating. The casualty rate for MACV-SOG was 100%. Everyone was either killed or wounded, and on May 2nd, 1968, a 12-man reconnaissance team was inserted near Loc Ninh, Cambodia. Their call sign was Recon Team Hammer, and they had just walked into a hornet's nest. Within minutes of landing in the dense Cambodian jungle, they were surrounded by a North Vietnamese battalion. That's roughly 300 enemy soldiers against 12 Americans and their indigenous allies. Back at the forward operating base in Loc Ninh, Staff Sergeant Benavidez heard the desperate radio calls. The team was being decimated. Multiple casualties. Helicopters had already tried to extract them. All had been driven back by enemy fire. Roy made a decision. He ran across the tarmac to a helicopter that was about to attempt another extraction. He had no weapon, no official orders, just a medical bag and a knife. His radio call sign was Tango Mike Mike. That meant "that mean Mexican." When the Huey helicopter reached the landing zone, the situation was worse than anyone had reported. Bodies were scattered across a small jungle clearing. The team leader was dead. The pilot was dead. The survivors were pinned down and running out of ammunition. The helicopter couldn't land. Enemy fire was too intense. So Roy jumped from a hover Approximately 20 feet off the ground, he hit the dirt running. Before he reached the team, he was shot in the right leg, the face, and the back of his head. He kept running. He grabbed a rifle from a dead enemy soldier. Then, he began gathering survivors, one by one, under constant fire. He dragged wounded men toward the helicopter's landing zone. An enemy grenade exploded near him. Fragments tore into his back. His eardrums ruptured from the concussion. A rescue helicopter finally managed to land in the smoke-filled clearing. Roy carried a wounded soldier to the aircraft and went back for more. That's when an enemy round hit him in the stomach. The bullet passed through his body and exited his back, tearing his intestines. Benavidez looked down and saw his own organs pushing out of the wound. He shoved them back in with his hand and kept moving. The helicopter pilot was killed. The aircraft crashed into the jungle. Roy pulled wounded survivors from the wreckage. Then he called in another extraction on the radio. While waiting for the next helicopter, an enemy soldier found Roy. They fought hand to hand, in the mud and blood. The North Vietnamese soldier slashed Roy across the arm with a bayonet. Roy killed him with his own knife. Another enemy soldier attacked. This one shot Roy in the thigh and clubbed him with a rifle butt, shattering his jaw. Benavidez killed him too. For 6 hours, this continued. Roy Benavidez, shot through and bleeding out, refusing to stop fighting. When the final helicopter arrived, Roy loaded the survivors first. 8 men who would not have survived without him. He was the last man pulled into the aircraft. When Roy arrived at the field hospital in Loc Ninh, he was covered in blood, his own and others. He couldn't speak. His jaw was shattered. He couldn't move. He was barely breathing. A medic examined him and made a decision. They put him in a body bag. As the doctor leaned over to close the zipper, Roy Benavidez did the only thing he could do. He couldn't speak. He couldn't move his arms. He spit in the doctor's face. That's when they knew he wasn't dead. Roy Benavidez had taken 37 wounds in that single battle. 7 bullet wounds, 28 shrapnel wounds, 2 bayonet slashes, and he was still alive. Roy Benavidez survived. After nearly a year of surgeries and rehabilitation, he returned to the army and eventually retired as a master sergeant. He settled in El Campo, Texas, the same town where teachers once told him he'd never amount to anything. But here's the thing about MACV-SOG. The mission was classified. The location was classified. Everything about what Roy did on May 2nd, 1968, was buried in files that wouldn't be opened for decades, for 13 years. Roy Benavidez received no recognition for the most extraordinary act of valor in Vietnam War history. The Distinguished Service Cross he initially received was later upgraded, but only because one man refused to let the story die. Brian O'Connor was one of the 8 men Roy saved that day. He spent years tracking down witnesses, compiling evidence, fighting bureaucracy, because he believed the world needed to know what Roy Benavidez had done. On February 24, 1981, President Ronald Reagan presented Roy Benavidez with the Medal of Honor at the Pentagon. It was the first Medal of Honor Reagan would present as president. Reagan stopped the ceremony to speak directly to the audience. He said, "If the story of his heroism were a movie script, you would not believe it." Roy Benavidez spent the rest of his life doing something unexpected. He went back to schools, the same kinds of schools where teachers once called him a dumb Mexican. He told students his story, not to brag, but to show them that where you come from doesn't determine where you can go, that the people who tell you no don't get to write your story, only you do. Roy once said, "An American hero is someone who has given of himself or herself for someone else." Roy Benavidez died on November 29, 1998. He was 63 years old. He's buried at Arlington National Cemetery, among the heroes he always believed deserved more recognition than he did. Today, a Navy ship bears his name. Schools, streets, and buildings across Texas honor his memory. But the greatest tribute is simpler than any of that. 8 men went home to their families because Roy Benavidez refused to quit, because a kid from the cotton fields of Texas decided that where he came from would never determine what he could become. If you want to see more stories like this, subscribe to the channel, and if this video meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear that impossible things are possible.